Denver Broncos cornerback Patrick Surtain was snubbed, in our opinion, in the AP All-Pro voting. We'll share our thoughts as to why, plus recognize two Broncos that got selected. You're going to get all that and much more. Today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
The Denver Broncos had two players selected in the AP All-Pro voting, but we feel like one player got left out in a big way. It opens up a big dialogue of discussion here in today's brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day every single day. Even as we get in the offseason here, for the true fan, there is never an offseason. We got you covered, whether you're watching on YouTube or whether you're listening wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe or follow down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase today. Sayre, NFL Wildcard Weekend was in the books. Some blowouts, some surprises, some not so surprises. But ultimately, as we're going to talk about the playoffs at some point here in today's episode of the show, we're going to start off with, obviously, what's going on with the Denver Broncos. We found out over the past week on Friday, the Associated Press's All-Pro voting came out. And to be honest with you, I was really surprised at some of the results and to see where some Broncos players ended up, where some guys got votes. But ultimately, two Broncos making the cut. No first-team All-Pros this year, but two second-team All-Pros for the Broncos in terms of media voting, which we're going to dive into here in a minute.
Yeah, one first-timer and one kind of regular now at this point. And let's talk about the regular. I got the jersey hanging up right behind me. That's Justin Simmons, now a four-time All-Pro selection and very deserving of that. I mean, Justin Simmons is essentially a guarantee for 5 or more turnover plays every single year, right, for your defense there in Denver. And he's just been awesome. I mean, a model of consistency, a leader for the team on and off the field, just a tremendous team captain in every sense of the term. And I know this is kind of a side, Cody, but I mean, and we're going to talk about this guy getting snubbed a little bit. And I don't mean to, drape the curtain over Marvin Mims and his accomplishments either, because he was named an All-Pro for the very first time, a second-team All-Pro as a return specialist. But how cool was it to see Justin Simmons going on Twitter, going to bat for his guy, Pat Surtain, right? And with other members of the Denver media who shall not be named. I mean, you can drop names.
Bunch of clowns.
Bunch of clowns is
sure.
Right. Yeah. And
I wouldn't even say media members, bro. That's the thing. Like, that's the thing with this whole thing is like the most vocal and most toxic, negative people that you see talking so much smack about players, like that clown that we're not going to name, really saying that Justin really does nothing. Like, Justin's done more in the community in the time that he's been in Denver than this guy's done in his entire life, that wants to get on Twitter and talk with a big head. The biggest clown in this area, not even a media member, doesn't go to practices, doesn't go to games, isn't credentialed to do so, is only credentialed to attend training camp every once in a while, and just the biggest clown ever. I love the fact that players actually took time to go out there and roast him and to clap back. And people are like, oh, it's not a great look for the players. BS. Like, these guys get torn apart by this clown every single year. And it just baffles me that these guys can't defend themselves or say something back. I love it. Personally, like, if you're going to put it out there, if you're going to talk reckless and try to even diminish the character of guys like Justin Simmons or Patrick Surtain, you deserve all the heat and all the smoke that comes away. Sorry, I had to vent about it because that pissed me off this weekend. And I was sitting back with my popcorn. I was enjoying it. And you had to really mess up if you're going to get Justin Simmons to clap at you on social media like that. Yes. That right there says a lot about the guy that we're talking about.
Yeah, and for those who have no idea what Cody and I are talking about, go check out Justin Simmons and Pat Surtain's Twitter pages and just kind of cycle through some of the tweets and replies and things like that. And it won't be hard to find, I'm sure, but it was just a great, I think, opportunity for Simmons to kind of break Twitter silence. These guys get, they do get dogged on quite a bit by a lot of specific, talking heads in Denver. And unfortunately, the reality is like these talking heads formulate opinions that get, you get a herd mentality a lot of times. And a lot of people catch on to these opinions. Like, Jerry Jeudy and the issue with drops that people have been talking about forever. It's like, well, why are people still talking about that? That was like 3 or 4 years ago at this point. Well, it's because talking heads continue to bring it up. And so a lot of these Broncos fans think it's still a problem because the talking heads still say that it is. So like it shapes fans' opinions, and that in turn, Cody, it could be a recruiting tool against players coming to Denver or wanting to come to Denver. It's like, hey, do you really want to go there? I mean, not that you're talking about players being soft towards the media, but man, I mean, when guys like this are dogging you all the time, you're making all pro. You're doing, like you said, great work in the community. I know we kind of took this a little off script a little bit, and that's my fault here, but I just think it's worth mentioning because Justin Simmons, I mean, he's all pro in every sense of the term. I mean, he goes to bat for the community. He's a leader on and off the field in every way. And he went to bat for his teammate here, which I really liked and admired.
And I think you need to see more of that. Look, you're going to get responses like, well, you guys should win more games. Like the reality of the situation is, yeah, Denver's obviously, they should win more games. That has nothing to do with the type of play that these guys have, the impact that they have as human beings, what they're doing in the community, what Patrick Surtain and what Justin Simmons have done in the community in their time here in Denver exceeds anything that clown will ever do in his entire lifetime, which is, probably not much. But I've seen firsthand how Justin is, and these guys, like it's funny because the same outlet and the same people, I see them at training camp. They try to get an interview. They want to get an interview with Pat. They want to get an interview with Justin. And I love seeing them say, "No, I'm not going to talk with those guys." Like, why would they? Why would they go and talk to somebody that is just so fake and pretentious and bashes them and tries to tear them down? Look, people don't understand in the media. It's our job to obviously talk about things. And all these players, and I can tell you this, I have great relationships with players in the Broncos locker room. They understand that I have a job to do and that I'm always going to come from a place where I'm going to be fair. Like I'm going to be objectively critical, but I'm never going to make my analysis of them as people or as players ever come across as personal or as a personal attack. I can say like, hey, this guy had a rough game, right? They understand that. I have rough games. I have rough performances on this podcast, right? And I know that a lot of people listen to the show, and sometimes I get the same feedback like, oh, you suck. I can't stand you. Like, hey, it happens. That's the world we live in. But the reality is some people in this industry have no idea the boundary, right? They make everything personal, and they don't make anything about like performance in a sense, or they don't understand how to evaluate performance. And to me, I think that's the most frustrating thing that I see being up close and personal. And Sayre, I always like to reiterate the loudest talking heads that you see on social media are people that never attend practice, that never attend games. They're not credentialed to. And that's why they speak so loudly, because that's the only way their voice gets heard. They have no idea really what they're talking about because they're not there. They don't get to see these guys. They don't get to talk to these guys in the locker room. And I just think that so many of these guys do such great work. Like I feel like the Broncos locker room, Sayre, they have so many great guys in that locker room. We talk about human beings, what they do on and off the field, just great overall guys. And it gets diminished by these idiots who just want to talk loudly for clicks. And it's a frustrating dynamic. And as you mentioned, it does create like this herd mentality with some, like the negative people that are angry about how the team is playing. They latch onto that. And then it just becomes a toxic discourse on social media, which unfortunately that's always going to be part of the game. But yeah, we're going to recognize though, Justin Simmons, second team All-Pro. Obviously, a lot of great cases. I even like this commentary. He even said that, hey, Jesse Bates of the Atlanta Falcons, he said he should have been a first-team All-Pro with the numbers and what he had this year. I like that these guys are having the conversations, but I'll always go back to this. I think media voters often at times, especially when the AP votes, a lot of them are on the East Coast. They don't necessarily watch all of the games. I like the fact that the NFLPA did the players vote where players get a vote on it. And obviously Patrick Surtain, as we know, 2 years in a row, first team All-Pro, as voted on by wide receivers that have gone against him and other cornerbacks in the league. Even Darius Slay saying Patrick Surtain is the best cornerback in football right now. So I think that probably means a little bit more going forward for this team. But Broncos Country, we want to know your thoughts on the debacle that was this weekend on the All-Pro conversation. Let us know if you're watching on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. But it's time to talk about playoffs. Yes, playoffs. Unfortunately, the Broncos, they missed out, but there was a wild weekend here for NFL Wildcard Weekend. We're going to dive deeper into that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends at the Game Time app. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event, especially if you want to go to the playoffs this upcoming weekend, if you're in different areas like Houston, who's going to be hosting yet another playoff game potentially. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events that are going on near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive on game day. All-in prices show your total upfront so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out, and you can buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Today's Locked On Broncos is also brought to you by our friends over there at Jace Medical. And look, we all get it. The world at times can be very uncertain. And in the event of an emergency or in the event of something unknown, it's nice to be prepared. And Jace Medical, they provide antibiotics for certain situations that could help you and your family if you are in need. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling if one of my loved ones or one of my family members, they got sick and there was a supply chain issue that kept them from some life-saving antibiotics or treatment that they may need. And thankfully, Jace Medical, they rectify that issue as well. They have the Jace case, which is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of different things that could arise at any moment, different emergencies. So make sure you're prepared here today with the Jace case. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order.
It's the NFL playoffs, and there was definitely a crazy wild card weekend, but not so crazy if you listen to the Locked On Broncos wild card preview, where Cody he's nailing his picks so far here. So maybe more of a crystal ball type of situation. He's 4-0 on those picks going into Monday's games, which will be exciting as well. But hey, we're going to break down the AFC NFC playoff matchups, some really good stuff over the weekend. But before we do, want to say thank you and give a huge shout out to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day, every single day, free and available everywhere that you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube, where you can watch the show and engage with other members of Broncos Country in the comments section. We appreciate every single one of you for tuning in right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And Cody, unfortunately, the Denver Broncos, once again, as we continue to beat this dead horse. Broncos not in the playoffs, but the playoffs were very fun. I guess the first weekend in general. You look at these games, of course, it's not fun when the Kansas City Chiefs win, but Patrick Mahomes kind of doing his best Darth Vader impression and breaking his helmet a little bit. We're seeing some stuff we've never seen before in the postseason, including, in my lifetime, Cody, I think the Detroit Lions won their last playoff game in 1992. I was 3 years old at that time. They've broken a streak that, man, if Broncos country is feeling the pain of 8 years of no playoffs, man, think about Detroit Lions fans who just won their first playoff game in 30 some odd years.
Yeah, no, we'll dive into the NFC games, but it was a wild weekend for the most part in wild card weekend here. We'll even find ways to tie in the Broncos to some of these games here. Obviously, the Texans hosting the Cleveland Browns. And look, Sayre, going into the game, the Cleveland Browns were favored, led by Joe Flacco, former Broncos quarterback who, at the beginning of that game, really in the first half, we felt like was kind of slinging it. And I put out a tweet, maybe a little prematurely, that said, hey, John Elway was right about Joe Flacco. He just might have been 5 years too early on his prediction. And then all of a sudden, the Flacco of the second half that we saw in 2019 for the Broncos kind of came to fruition, back-to-back pick sixes. The Houston Texans just boat raced the Cleveland Browns. This was an exciting game in the first 10, 15 minutes. They were trading barbs back and forth. We're like, hey, this is exactly what we thought was going to happen. Like you and I predicted this was going to be a shootout game. Well, it wasn't necessarily a shootout. It was kind of a blowout in that regard here. But obviously Denver playing the Houston Texans earlier this season, a game that they had a chance to win. And I couldn't help but while watching that game think man, Denver went to Houston. And, as much as they struggled at times, they still had a chance to beat this very good Houston Texans team. And that could have maybe put them in the playoffs. And maybe there could have been a rematch, so to speak, if Denver would have taken care of business in that game. But man, CJ Stroud, Sayre, he is the real deal. And I feel like when we were talking about when the Broncos needed a quarterback, this was years back when Patrick Mahomes really started lighting it up, right, in his second season. He kind of reset the standard for the expectations for rookie guys, even though I think most people forget he didn't play as a rookie, except his first game was against the Broncos in the week whatever season finale there, and he started making some plays there. But the skewed expectation was a young guy has to come in and play like Patrick Mahomes right away. That has now changed. I think the overall perception for teams that are in need of a quarterback are going to say, look at CJ Stroud, look how he's playing. It's a different level. It's an anomaly. In my opinion, easily the offensive rookie of the year. He was incredible, and he did it without Tank Dell, his second best receiver. Him and Nico Collins have a great chemistry, great relationship in terms of their rapport on the field. But, man, I look at Houston and say that team's going to be a problem here in the AFC for some years to come. If they can keep a little bit of that nucleus together, I was blown away by it, and obviously they boat race a very good Cleveland Browns defense, which unfortunately struggled on the road.
Yes, they did, Cody. And I think to your point about CJ Stroud, right? It really gives you hope that, man, you could turn around things very quickly. I mean, the Broncos won 8 games this year, so they're not in the same boat as the Houston Texans were, which a couple of years ago, you could have argued the Houston Texans roster was maybe the worst in the NFL by a lot. And now they've really rebounded, and they've done a great job of figuring out how to build around somebody before he even got there, right? They built that roster without Stroud in the mix. And so that was just a great job by the whole staff there, and obviously D'Amico Ryans, but they were able to beat the Cleveland Browns despite the fact Joe Flacco threw 3 touchdown passes, Cody. I mean, I know 2 of them were caught by the Houston Texans defensive players in return for 6, but man, Joe was certainly slinging it around the yard. I thought that was a fun game in terms of just seeing young guys have success. It's one of the coolest things in the NFL is like, hey, if it's not going to be your team, you might as well see like the coolest stories unfold, right? And CJ Stroud and D'Amico Ryans is certainly one of the coolest stories. And I think they got a pretty good chance of keeping the Kansas City Chiefs out of the mix if it comes to that, which it could in round 2. We don't know exactly what the matchups are going to look like, but man, we could see potentially CJ Stroud and the Texans visiting Kansas City in the second round of the playoffs. If my math is right there, if the Steelers find a way to win, they're going to Baltimore, and Houston would go to Kansas City. So, I mean, you just want the best possible teams, I think, at this point. You see Kansas City go in and get a win in the first round against the Miami Dolphins, who, you know, they're limping all around the place right now. Defensively, they got nobody out there. I mean, it sucks to see because that was such an exciting team for so much of the season. But Kansas City, once again, kind of feeling inevitable. I'm not too far away in Omaha here. It's to think of anybody being at a game outside here, Cody. I was texting you earlier today, minus 35. Okay. And if anybody's outside doing anything, you're insane. But to see people shirtless at the game and to see guys playing, I mean, to see Patrick Mahomes bust his helmet, I mean, just because of how cold it is there. And I mean, man, it just makes, if it's making your helmets brittle, you got to reconsider what you're doing out there.
No, I agree. And look, for Miami, I think the game plan was like, hey, come out and try to run the ball. Like that was their strength there. The explosive play nature wasn't going to be there. And obviously Kansas City's defense, they know how to turn it on when the playoffs come up, which is a little unfortunate. But the Dolphins didn't look like the Dolphins that we've seen. You mentioned how banged up they were defensively. That played a factor into it. Even though they blitzed the hell out of Patrick Mahomes, there were times where they got to him. Obviously, we can talk about penalties at some point. That wasn't the unfortunate deciding factor of the game, though it was frustrating to see the Chiefs get some of the calls that they did get. They're going to move on, and obviously we'll find out what the AFC divisional playoff picture is going to look like because the Bills and the Steelers are set to play today. We'll see if that gets moved or changed. There's a possibility, obviously, with the weather that's going on in Buffalo. It is crazy, very dangerous. We hope everybody is able to stay safer and stay warm in these conditions. We'll have an update for you a little bit later on here in the week here, but we are going to get to the NFC side as well. I mean, there are a couple of teams out there that, hey, can the Broncos maybe follow their blueprint a little bit? We'll dive deeper to that. You'll get that here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL regular season has wrapped up, and we are here in the playoffs as we prepare for NFL Divisional Weekend. There's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers that sign up today, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. When you place a $5 bet, you sign up today as a brand new customer, you place a $5 bet, you are going to get $150 in bonus bets, whether your bet wins or whether it loses. So find a way to get on the action, especially as the NFL playoffs continue here this week. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is super easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You want to bet on the action as it's going on. You want to predict what's coming up next. You want to predict anytime touchdown scores and all of the matchups next week. FanDuel Sportsbook is a place that you can get on the action. You can find bets in the new Explore tab, and you can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. It is the best way to find popular parlays within the community and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. As we jump into the fourth quarter action here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, take a look at the NFC playoff picture real quick. We want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Now, if you listen to last week's NFL Wildcard Weekend preview, I was on the record of saying I've got the Packers going into Dallas and upsetting the Cowboys. They did that, but not to the magnitude that I expected. It was worse than I expected. They blew the brakes off of the Dallas Cowboys, now putting that organization and their future into question here. But also, I think we got a little bit of a glimpse from the Green Bay Packers, Sayre, that I wanted to float out as it pertains to the Broncos. Is there a potential scenario here, looking at what the Packers did with Jordan Love? And obviously, he sat behind Aaron Rodgers for various years and is now playing. Jordan Love looked like the real deal. He looked like a player who is finally in a place where he could just light it up, and he torched a Dallas Cowboys defense that was arguably the most aggressive, one of the best defenses in the league. Obviously, Stephon Gilmore was banged up a little bit coming into the game. They lost Trayvon Diggs earlier in the season for the entire year, but they still had Micah Parsons and company. It was still a good defense, even though that they were missing Diggs for a good portion of the season. Is the Packers process, in your opinion, with Jordan Love something that the Broncos should embrace? And that would obviously mean, I don't know if you saw the tweet from Russell Wilson over the weekend, talked about his favorite moment from the Broncos this season, Cortland Sutton's toe tap against Buffalo. And he said, us finally beating the Chiefs. He said 2023 was good. 2024 is going to be better. We all know that George Payton and Sean Payton said the door is open. Could the Broncos potentially go this path of getting a young guy this year and having him sit for 2 more years behind a guy like Russell Wilson?
Yes, let's do it. I mean, hey, whatever we need to do to get this team back to winning, right? I mean, the Broncos won 8 games this year, and that was with a historically bad offense in the first 5-6 weeks, right? So, or defense, excuse me, historically bad defense in terms of the franchise history. So, if you can be even just average defensively for most of the season, you got to figure you've got a really good chance to do something. So why not bring back Russell Wilson? You and I were talking off the air. You're already paying him $39 million this year. And if you're hung up on the $37 million for next year, get to the negotiating table yesterday and start figuring that out and figuring out how you can make it work, because I don't think you want to pay Russell Wilson $39 million to go sling it for the Las Vegas Raiders and or anybody in the division for that matter, or anybody else in the AFC that could stand in your way, anybody that you're playing this season. So I wouldn't want to foot the bill if it was me, Cody. I know the ownership group is very wealthy, but man, that's a lot of money to pay for somebody not to work for your organization. So I think in terms of what you said about the Packers and the way that they've built around Jordan Love, you know, I've got the opportunity to cover the Packers a bit more this year than normal. And I'm fascinated by, as critical as I've been of Brian Gutekunst through the years of not drafting guys to help Aaron Rodgers. And I think there was some validity to that while Rodgers was still there. They have just nailed the NFL draft. You talk about throwing darts. I know George Payton talks about throwing darts. How many of their draft picks have hit the last 2, 3, 4 years at this point? I mean, they don't have many misses in Green Bay right now. Their player development is off the charts, but offensively, this is why they took such a huge step and why Jordan Love is playing so well. It's guys, it's not just like, the Devontae Adams types. It's guys like Romeo Doubs, a 4th-round pick. It's Christian Watson, a 2nd-round pick. It's the Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave, day 2 picks, Tavian Wicks. Bo Melton, a waiver pickup, a guy who's on the practice squad, comes up out of nowhere and gets 100 yards. They've got guys just seeping through every portion of this organization. It feels like playmakers, take shots on playmakers, draft playmakers. They took 3 wide receivers, I believe, a couple of years ago in the draft. One of them didn't play yesterday, but they took, after the year after drafting 3 wide receivers, they go back and they take 2 tight ends and 2 more receivers in the next draft. Jaden Reed, 2nd-round pick. I mean, I know they got a lot more picks than the Broncos do, Cody, but draft playmakers and follow whatever athletic profile Gutekunst is doing right now.
Well, and even George Payton said it is you build depth by drafting and developing guys. So if Denver can get to that threshold, I think that's going to be the plan and the process for them going forward here. Obviously, we know there's going to be another game today on the NFC side of things, the Bucks and the Eagles. That'll be a very interesting matchup. The Eagles going to be without A.J. Brown. Very, very interesting dynamic with what's going on there. Baker Mayfield, questionable, but is expected to play. We'll see if the Bucks can beat the Eagles and upset them. I don't even know if it would be an upset at this point, considering the drop-off Philadelphia has had. There could be a lot of changes coming in Philly here. But let's talk about the Lions and the Rams game, man. Last night, that was an entertaining game. Obviously, some back-and-forth shots between the Lions. Matthew Stafford going back to Detroit. Jared Goff once again dicing it up and being effective there. They hold on for a 24-23 victory here. And I've seen so many people, I don't know if you saw it over the weekend, I've seen a lot of people suggest that the Broncos could embrace the model of the Detroit Lions in 2024, right? How they approach 2023. Could they maybe follow in the same footsteps? They went on a little bit of run after being 1-5, right? And it also drew those comparisons. I felt like we saw a lot of things that Denver can do to maybe replicate some of the teams that are having success here. I think Denver has some of the pieces to do it, but obviously a very, very entertaining slate of games in the NFC.
Yeah, it was. I mean, watching that Lions-Rams game was about everything you could have expected, with Matthew Stafford coming back to Detroit and the Lions just showing their resilience once again. I mean, the Rams getting to the red zone and the Lions defense having to buckle down. Like, it was the Puka Nacua show. It was the Amon-Ra St. Brown show. I mean, do you talk about stashing? Cody, how many times do I got to say, keep drafting playmakers? My gosh, Puka Nacua, 5th round, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 4th round. Draft the playmakers, George Payton and Sean Payton. My goodness, that's what we need more of in Denver. But it was a fun slate of games over the weekend, Cody. To see the Lions win in front of their home crowd was really cool, obviously. Even though I would have loved to have seen both the Rams and the Lions be able to move on into the next round, because, I mean, honestly, do we see the Bucks or the Eagles as much of a threat to the 49ers? I don't think so. I mean, the Rams were the hottest team in the league going in. The Lions, I think they're the team of destiny on the NFC side. And this game kind of proved that. I mean, how many opportunities did the Rams have that they just couldn't cash in? So I'm fascinated by what's going to come in round 2. Detroit's going to host a playoff game, obviously. And now you've got the opportunity to say, hey, I mean, what's next, right? And we can keep this thing going. So if I'm rooting for teams in the playoffs right now, Cody, it's definitely got to be Houston and Detroit, 2 teams that have never won the Super Bowl before. Would be very fun.
No, I'm with you there. Those would be my 2 picks. Obviously San Francisco is very good. They're looking to try to capitalize on that window. I always wonder too. I was watching the game and I kept wondering, what would they have looked like if they actually made that trade for Matthew Stafford a few years back, right? I wonder it all the time. Would Denver be in the position that maybe the Rams were in, or would it be like Denver's environment once again wasn't sustainable enough to help a guy like Matthew Stafford succeed? I'm very, very curious to see if we could ever go down that rabbit hole. We might do that here this offseason, but some entertaining games and obviously some correlations between the Broncos and maybe some strategies that they can do, some emphasis on the offseason. We'll break it all down here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. What were your thoughts on the crazy NFL playoff weekend? Let us know down below. But that'll wrap up today's episode of the show on Broncos Country. Now that the offseason is here, look, we'll still preview some of the playoff games as there's football that will be on, but a lot of our Broncos Center content is going to be coming up here. We're going to take a look at Broncos free agents on the offensive side of the ball in tomorrow's episode of the show. Who's unrestricted? Who's restricted? Who should be back? Who may not be back? What might Denver do? We'll take a deep dive into that here on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.